we're going to look at how Power BI Desktop can be used to pull together disparate data sources from a JSON document to an Excel spreadsheet to a CSV flat file, and how we can bring all those together and model them within Power BI as well as Power Query. In order to get started, we'll launch Power BI Desktop. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is pull in some data. So if you see the splash screen, you can click on Get Data right from the splash screen. But if that doesn't appear, you can also see Get Data up in the ribbon. So we'll click on Get Data. And we're going to connect to various different types of data sources. But the first one is an Excel spreadsheet. So we'll select Excel, find our document. And as Power BI imports this data, it recognizes the differences between formatted tables as well as worksheets. So we only just want to bring in the formatted tables, so we'll check those 4 boxes. And if we were to click Load, Load will load the data immediately into Power BI Desktop and we can start visualizing straight away. But what we actually want to do is click on Edit, because there's some data modeling that I want to do in order to make sure that our data is nice and clean and in a suitable state for reporting before we start building our visualizations. So you can see Power BI has actually launched Power Query. So you may be used to Power Query in Excel, and this is essentially allows us to do a whole bunch of data modeling, and you can see a lot of the features and functions up in the ribbon. So on the left hand side we have our different queries that represent one of those tables within the Excel document. And as I toggle between them, you can see the structure for each query is identical in terms of the columns that we have access to. So one of the first things I actually want to do is combine all this so that we have one query that represents the market values of all these various cryptocurrencies. So in order to do that, we're going to need to add a custom column that represents the symbol so that we can uniquely identify each of these rows once the various queries are combined. So up in the ribbon, we've got Add Column, and then we'll click on Custom Column. And we'll call this Custom Column Symbol, and we'll add the crypto symbol for that currency. So for Bitcoin Cash, we've got BCH, and we'll fill this out for the remaining tables. Okay, so now that we have a symbol column for each of our queries, we're good to combine all our data. So if we go back to the Home section on the ribbon, on the right hand side you'll see an area where we can combine data, and we have the difference between merging queries or appending queries. So as the icons depict, merging queries is around stitching more columns of data together, whereas append queries adds more rows. In this case, we want to add more rows, so append query is the right option in this instance. So we'll click on append. We have more than 2 tables. We'll bring the 3 across and we'll select OK. And that's it. So all 4 tables have now been appended in the Bitcoin query. So in that case, we no longer need these other 3 queries, so we can right click on those and stop them from coming into our report. And since this first query is no longer just about Bitcoin, we'll rename it to call market values. Okay, so a couple more changes. I can see there's some asterisks in our column name, so we'll just get rid of those. And you can see on the left hand side of each of the column names, we have the area that depicts what type of column we're talking about. So in this instance, we have some text, we have a date, but not always will Power BI correctly assign the right data type immediately. So for open, high, low, close, it's selected decimal number, but we can see here that currency is actually associated with fixed decimal number. So we want to change all of these 4 to fixed decimal number. Okay, so that's looking a bit better. Volume and market cap based on the, particularly for market cap, while it's still a currency, because they're such large numbers, we'll leave the precision to be whole number. And other than that, I think we're good to go. So we'll click on Close and Apply, and that will bring our data into our Power BI report. The next data set that we want to bring in is a CSV file. So we'll click on Get Data up in the ribbon. We'll choose text/CSV and click Connect. And the CSV file contains the longer form names of those cryptocurrency symbols. So same as before, we'll click on Edit to launch Power Query. And while the data is not that complex, I can see that the headings, symbol and name, actually need to be promoted. But fortunately in Power Query there's a one-click button within the ribbon. Use first row as headers that we can click and fix that problem. So that's it. So now that that query is up to scratch, we can rename it and we'll call it currencies. And you can see now in Power Query we've got a mixture of active and inactive queries. What you may want to do is actually group these into folders just purely to make kind of tracking your different queries much easier. So if we right click, we can go move to group, new group. We'll call this group inactive, and we'll create a new group called active. And these will hold the queries that will actually surface into the report. That's it, and again, close and apply. Data source that we want to connect to is actually a JSON document. This JSON document holds the market share of these cryptocurrencies over time. And JSON is a common data format used by APIs on the web. You may also find it in document-based databases like MongoDB and Cosmos DB. So just so we can see what the internals of this particular JSON document looks like, you can see here in VS Code, if I collapse our market share.json and we expand it one by one. So at the first level, we have the 4 different currencies. If we expand one of these, such as Bitcoin, within it we can see an array of lists. And then if we expand that once more, we can see some actual values. So these values, the first one represents a date timestamp in the form of an Epoch Unix format. And the second value is the market share at that particular time for that particular cryptocurrency. So essentially we have a list of lists. Now, if we collapse that again and revert back to Power BI, we can see here that it essentially has it in that collapsed state. So the first thing that we want to do is in the ribbon, under convert, we've got this convert into table as a single click operation. So we'll click on that. And Power BI very easily converts that JSON document into a table that we can further expand and ultimately extract our values. So if we click on this particular cell, I can still see we have this list that contains that nested list of values. And within the column, if I click on the header, I can expand each of these into new rows. So ultimately I'm trying to flatten this data out. And now that we have each of those lists expanded out to a new row, if we click on that cell again, I can start to see the values that we want to extract out into columns. So if we click on the header again, we'll say extract these lists into values. And Power BI will surface the dialog asking us how do we want to delimit each of the values within the list. So in this instance, we'll select comma, click OK. And I can see here the values have been extracted now, but they're all in that one column. So up in the ribbon under home, we have this option to split column. So we'll click on that by delimiter, comma, add an each occurrence. So if we click OK, our 2 values will now separate. So now if I rename this first column, we have our epoch value, which represents our date time, and our raw market share value. But they're not quite there yet. So we want to convert this epoch value into date time. To convert this, we'll add a new column, custom column. We'll call this column date. And the formula I've got ready to go in my notepad, but basically this formula is simply using the M query language syntax that Power Query uses. So M for mashup language. And we're going to convert our epoch using these functions into a date time. So we'll click OK, and we'll change our type from date time to just date, because that's all I'm after. And then the second column, we want to convert these raw market share values into a decimal so we can ultimately format it as a percentage. So we'll create a new custom column called market share, and we'll just do value divided by 100 and change our market share to decimal number. So you can see as I'm making all these changes, on the right hand side we have these applied steps, which is just tracking everything as we're going along. So if we wanted to step back in time, reconfigure a particular step, delete a step, all of that is at our fingertips within this applied steps window. So now that we have date and market share, we no longer need the raw values from Epoch and value. Now, so we can remove those by highlighting the columns, right-clicking and clicking remove columns. And you'll notice that the data still sticks around. We haven't destroyed the data that underpins date and market share. And finally, we want to convert our name column into the same format that we have under market values and currencies with the cryptocurrency symbol. So first we'll filter date to a particular date just so we can see each of the 4 types of currencies. And then now we'll highlight the name column and select column from examples under the add column ribbon. And we'll pick selection. So what this feature does, it allows us to just type in values that we want to appear whenever we see Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. And you'll notice at the top here, Power BI is actually starting to take a guess at what the formula is that you're after based on the values that you're inputting. So at the moment it's saying if name is equal Bitcoin then BTC, else if name is equal to Bitcoin Cash and BTH, but as we populate the additional values, our formula will be fully written out to best practice without us having to write the code ourselves. So we'll type in ETH and XRP. And you can see at the top there now we have our fully qualified if statement without having to actually write any code. And this feature is quite useful. So in this case, we've supplied each of the individual values. We have a short list of 4, and we needed to provide Power BI, otherwise it wouldn't have been able to guess in this particular instance what value we want to substitute. But there may be other scenarios where, say, you're working with dates such as January, February, March, and if you start to type in the first 3 letters, Power BI will, after the second value entry, will start to understand, okay, you just want the first 3 letters of all these month values. I will just auto-populate the rest so you don't have to fill it out for every single one. So it's quite a powerful feature. So we've got our column, and we'll call this symbol to match the others. But our data's been filtered, and we only did that just to make it easier to write up this particular column. But if we leave the data filtered, it's actually going to filter all the way through the report. So back in our applied steps, we want to remove the filtered row step. So if you highlight and select the filtered rows, click on the delete icon and select delete. We've deleted something mid-step, and if we jump back forward, we've renamed our column. We're back to where we were without the filtering happening. So it's a way of kind of deleting steps midstream and then jumping back forward in time. So we'll drag over symbol to the beginning, get rid of the name column as we no longer need that, change market share to be a percentage, and we'll rename our query just to match the casing, and we'll move that over to the active group. And that's it. So we're done. So we'll click on home, close and apply, and bring in our final table into Power BI Desktop. At this point, we're essentially done with Power Query, and we'll do the final remainder of modeling within the Power BI Desktop only. So we'll go through a bit of the interface. Right at the top, we have again our ribbon that's you'll be quite used to if you've used any of Microsoft's Office 365 products. On the right hand side, we've got these 2 panels, so field and visualization filters. So field has our 3 tables that we've brought in, and we can search for attributes across those tables. Visualizations, as the name suggests, we can click on these and bring in different types of visuals, and if I toggle between them, you'll notice that they have various different types of properties. And within the middle, we've got our large white canvas where we can drag and drop visuals, and at the bottom we can add new pages. And this canvas is corresponding to a report. So within Power BI Desktop, as we drag and drop visuals and text and buttons and shapes, we're actually building a report. So that's the pane that we're on at the moment. The other two panes, we've got data, which has our different tables with a data focus, where we can do a bit more modeling. And then finally, the relationships between our tables. Now you can see there's some relationships already starting to form that Power BI has done on its own, based on the common column name. So if I double click on one of these joins, we can see that symbol is related to symbol across the two market share and currency tables, and Power BI has automatically worked out the cardinality and the filtering of the direction. So for now, the defaults are fine in this scenario, but if they were wrong, you could obviously also adjust them. Now, one thing that I've noticed is that we have date actually in two different tables, and what I actually want is just a unified kind of time dimension coming from a singular date table. So using DAX, Power BI's data analysis expressions, we can also create tables. So back in the data pane, under modeling, we'll click on new table. So we're going to create a new table purely from DAX. Now, you can also connect to date tables that may exist in maybe your database, a SQL Server environment, but Power BI gives you the option just through a single formula. So we've got like CALENDARAUTO, very similar to Excel. You've kind of got that type ahead with the formulas and functions within DAX, and hints in terms of what the parameter values is expecting. In this instance, we require the fiscal year end month, which I'll say is June. And then that's it. So hitting enter, we have a table now that has a whole bunch of dates. And we can do some additional modeling. So we'll change the format of this date to be a bit shorter. So we'll call it DDMMYY. And we can add some additional columns. So we'll add in year. And if you've used Excel formulas, the syntax is very similar. So we'll say year date. We'll add a new column called month. And our last column, day. And obviously you could go to your heart's content in terms of quarters and all different types of time attributes. So, but we'll just leave this at day for now. Okay, so if we go back to relationships, I can see our new date table, but it's kind of hanging here orphaned off. So to connect our newly created table, we'll just click on date, drag and drop on the date in the market values table and do the same thing in market share. And now that we have date, if we go back to our report, you can see we've got all our date values coming in this kind of unified date table. We no longer need the date values from market values or market share. So if we go back to relationships, and there are different areas in Power BI that you can do this, but we can right click here and say hide in report view. I don't want to bring these particular dates from these tables because I'm going to use the unified date table. Okay, so that's our date table. So just some final modeling that we'll do in Power BI Desktop, more around like the formatting. So our currencies table is fine. Dates is okay. Market values. So market values, I can see that even though it's recognized our open, high, low, close as a currency, it's defaulted to my locale, which is British pounds, but I actually know that these values are in US dollars, so we'll change that under the modeling tab in the ribbon to USD. So we'll do that for all four. So volume, we'll just add the 1,000 separators as those numbers can get quite large. Similarly for market cap, we'll say currency USD, but also we want the 1000 separators, so that's already put it in there, and we'll leave the precision for 0. In addition, for these numbers, we can change the default summarization. So being stock market attributes, I actually don't want it to sum, I want it just to average out depending what level that is the data is being represented. So we'll change the default summarization to average across all our numeric values. Okay, so that's looking good for market values. In our last table, market share, we'll make sure that that is represented as a percentage. And we'll also change the default summarization to average. So that's it. We're ready to start building some visuals. So just a recap in terms of what we've done. We've connected to disparate data sources, a JSON document, an Excel spreadsheet, and a CSV flat file. We've connected those data sources into Power BI Desktop and used Power Query as well as the modeling capabilities within Power BI Desktop itself to model and enrich our data. And now we're ready to build out some of our visualizations. So that's it for this video in the series. The next video we'll look at building our visualizations to start to pull together our report.